So I started to diet and started to obsess over everything that I was eating. I was a religious calorie counter and calorie tracker and obsessed with exercise to control my body. And it led me to develop an eating disorder that I dealt with for 8 years of my life. And I think the hard thing for me was I thought I was just doing everything right. That's like part of my personality. I'm like A+ student, rule follower, type A. So I was just like trying to be the quote perfect healthy eater. And it ended up leading me to have a really unhealthy relationship with food and my body and just obsessively looking to food.
I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast.
When we got sober, it wasn't just giving up alcohol that was the issue. We had to change our lives, how we thought about our thought processes, how we behaved. That was the thing that got rid of the alcohol, because alcohol was the thing that was our solution. And in treating alcohol, we had to treat the other defects in our life, Steve. And one of those things is, I don't know about you. Well, I know. I was going to say, I don't know about you, but I know this too, because I know how you eat. Damn it, I eat alcoholically. I can just lose control eating.
Without question. We've talked about it many times in this podcast. And as I said before, I'll say it again so the audience can hear it. Is behind me, I have a bookcase which has all my AA stuff in there. And it also has OA stuff in there, which I just dabbled with. And matter of fact, just last year, just dabbled with a little bit, got on, did some Zoom meetings, and have not sort of jumped into that. But we'll talk a little bit about it. I can tell you a little bit about all the different diets I've been on, all the money I spent on those diets, and how they all worked. They all worked until they didn't. So
Absolutely.
We'll talk a little bit about it.
So I discovered Victoria Yates on Instagram. She has awesome videos, little quick hit stuff about how to eat better. And what Victoria Yates preaches is intuitive eating. And I had not really heard about intuitive eating. She's also the host of the podcast, Redefining Health Podcast. She's doing a while. She's up to, as we're taping this, 178, which is about where I listen to. Victoria, welcome to the Sober Friends Podcast.
Thank you both for having me. So glad to be here.
Victoria, I told my 10-year-old daughter, who knows I do this, a little bit about intuitive eating. And she whipped her, 10 years old, by the way, whipped around. She goes, "Oh, I know all about that. It's about listening to your body." I go, "How do you know that?" "Oh, I watch YouTube." So apparently this is like a thing that I did not realize, but it totally makes sense. So give us a little bit of your bona fides. You were a registered nurse, and now, if I'm understanding, you're counseling people one-on-one, coaching them through this. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I like to say, kind of like any woman in her teenage years when, bodies start to change, I started to do the thing that our culture tells us we have to do, which is control our bodies, keep our bodies from changing. So I started to diet and started to obsess over everything that I was eating. I was a religious calorie counter and calorie tracker and obsessed with exercise to control my body. And it led me to develop an eating disorder that I dealt with for 8 years of my life. And I think the hard thing for me was I thought I was just doing everything right. That's like part of my personality. I'm like A+ student, rule follower, type A. So I was just like trying to be the quote perfect healthy eater. And it ended up leading me to have a really unhealthy relationship with food and my body and just obsessively looking to food. And kind of like what you said, Matt, about how intuitive eating just makes so much sense with our bodies. So I dealt with, this unhealthy relationship with food for quite a long time, and then found intuitive eating on a podcast. Someone was talking about it and with my nursing background and knowledge of the human body and our biology, it just made so much sense with how our bodies work that we don't actually have to like count and track and measure every little thing that we're eating to be healthy, that we really can just listen to our bodies. So that was the start for me in breaking free from dieting and getting to a place of trusting myself with food and trusting my body and eating intuitively.
My son is 14 years old. I've gotten him into weights. He wanted to do weights, so I thought I was going to teach him all about being in the gym. We started last July. He now teaches me. Mm-hmm. And as we're eating at Shake Shack a couple weeks ago, he counts all of his calories on an app, and it works for him. And he wants to get me on this app. And I looked at him, I go, I cannot do this, Owen. I'm terrified of counting. I will feel bad doing it. He goes, do you have a bad image about food? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm going to help you with that. I go, dude, you're 14 years old. You can't. But I appreciate the fact that he has that app and he counts everything and it works for him. Now, it also works for him because he's always short. He does volleyball, he does basketball, and he'll do a couple hours of practice and then say, okay, I'm ready to go work out now. So yeah, if you're counting calories and you want to build muscle, I appreciate what you're doing there. I'm not working out that way, and I will kill myself if I get on one of those apps. How does like tracking calories fit into intuitive eating?
Yeah, so that's something that a lot of my clients, whether it's counting calories or counting macros, which is really big now.
I got to count my macros, that's what he tells me.
I know, yeah. So, I was talking to actually a power lifter recently, and we were having this conversation about macros because it's really big in that area, in that field. And she was talking about how she uses, counting macros to help her essentially not lose weight because she's working so hard, working her body so hard. And, for that person, and then also like she doesn't take this very extreme approach to it where it's like make or break, which a lot of times like my personality is very like perfectionist oriented.
Me
from
too.
Just the get-go and the all or nothing thinking. So like for me, when I was counting calories, it was like, if I went over my calories by like 5 calories, I would shame myself and feel so guilty and go to bed like feeling like a horrible person. And that's kind of like, I think we have to have this self-awareness. And honestly, I don't believe that anyone, unless you're in a really athletic field and you're like really working out a ton and you're like trying to not lose weight, most people don't need to count calories. Most people don't need to count macros. We really can just listen to our bodies, and our body gives us everything that we need. And, most of my clients are at the point where they've counted for so long, and it's such a tedious task to do day in and day out. And it's unnecessary, for the majority of people. So especially when you do have a good relationship with food and you just listen to your body.
Interesting that you're talking about this because I have one of those apps that I was doing last year. And matter of fact, I bought into it for a year. And it renews today. And I haven't renewed it yet, right? Because I haven't been using it recently. And it's like, doing the same thing, doing the macros, doing everything like that, all that kind of stuff. A couple things that I want to, expand a little bit on. Two things. First of all is the obsession, right? You had an obsession, whatever way it was. And then the thing that I want to hear about is trusting your own body. Like, dive into that a little bit to see, like, first of all, how do you overcome your obsession? And then how do you define trusting your body? Like, how does it tell us what we want?
Yeah. Well, like from even like science perspective, biological perspective, like when our cells are actually depleted of energy, it sends a signal to our brain that sends a signal out through our body and gives us what we experience as hunger. So a couple things might happen for you, and everybody's a little bit different, but you might feel like a slight emptiness in your stomach when you're hungry. You might start to notice a little bit of a mood change where you start to get hangry. You might start, something that's really big for me is I start to get distracted and I start to think about food. So if I'm if I'm trying to work or do something and I'm starting to feel hungry, I might have a hard time and staying focused. You might just notice like a little slump in your energy. So these are all cues that your body gives you that say, hey, we need some extra fuel in our body. Like we need something to eat. So that's your cue to say, okay, I got to start to think about, what do I have on hand? If it's near lunchtime, like, what do I want to eat for lunch? What do I have? If it's like between meals, do I need a little snack to tide me over to dinner? So I'm not getting to dinner and I'm like ravenous. And then I have a hard time actually eating mindfully. Because that's the other thing is when we are waiting too long to eat, which is something that I see a lot of times with people where they're not noticing those early hunger cues because we're not necessarily used to listening to our bodies, right? We're so used to like, is it time to eat? Or did my diet say that like I can eat at this time yet? Right. So we're not used to listening to our bodies, that we maybe aren't really familiar with what those early hunger cues are. So we're waiting too long. And then we're getting into like the late hunger cues, which are, that's where you're like ravenous and you're like, give me this food ASAP right now. And you might be a lot more, or you're probably a lot less mindful about what you're eating and maybe just like grabbing that quick, like convenience food, even if you don't necessarily want it.
I got to get whatever is around and I got to eat that now. And if you get in my way, I'm going to hurt you.
Exactly. Yes. And then you're like eating it and you're not mindful while you're eating it. So you're probably overeating and eating past fullness. So, but as far as like when you are in a really good rhythm of just like listening to your body cues, listening to your early hunger cues and eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're at that comfortable fullness, because it doesn't feel good to overeat. Most people don't enjoy that.
It's
so if we can,
awful.
It is awful.
Yes. So if we can, there's a lot of, maybe we can even talk about like the biggest reasons why people overeat. Because once you can figure that out, then, you can start to make some changes. But yeah, so as far as trusting your body, I see it as like kind of a process of number one, letting go of some of the things that keep you from trusting your body, whether that is the calorie tracking app or whatever app you use to like document, right? Those are all, you're kind of looking to this outside source to tell you how to eat. So letting go of that and then just playing around with and experimenting and getting to know your body cues for hunger and fullness and just starting to use those. And this is something that, I think one of the biggest hurdles that people struggle with this is they're afraid of failure. They're afraid of overeating, but it's like anything that we learn, any new skill, we have to kind of, maybe you do overeat a little bit, but then if you can look back and say, all right, let me look at this from a place of neutrality and learn from this. Like, why did I overeat? And then you can start to make some changes. But it's a process of like building up this evidence for yourself through putting yourself out there and like giving your body a chance to trust yourself. That's how the overall trusting your body starts to build.
When I started hearing you say, I have to let go of some of that stuff, the first thing I thought of was the AA steps 6 and 7. I have to be ready to let go of my defects, and then I have to hand them over to a higher power. It's as hard getting rid of my old ideas of food, even if they're helpful, than it is giving up some of the things about me which are nasty, but it's like a warm blanket. It's a corrosive, warm feeling. And if I have to give up the fact that I have to let go of my preconceptions of eating, as simple as that is and as healthy as it is, that's hard because now I've given up an excuse.
Mm-hmm.
They don't call it comfort food for nothing, right? I mean, it's one of the things we do, right? I think a lot of people eat emotionally. I know I do.
Sure do.
I mean, yeah, I do. So I can eat, when I'm trying to celebrate, and I can eat when I'm sort of upset. And I can eat to punish myself sometimes, right? I mean, I can literally do that, being really like disgusted with life or be disgusted with myself. Or, like you said, or feel like I failed and then go, why bother, right? Why bother?
Yeah, it's the what the heck eating.
Why even try?
Yeah.
I might as well just go out to Dairy Queen and buy, whatever I want, and that's a horrible mindset. It really is. There's a great meme out there, and you'll see it different ways, and I always love it. It says, "Be brave enough to suck at something," or I've seen it, "Be brave enough to fail at something." And it does take some courage to go out there and say, I'm going to try this. And if I fail, I'm going to keep going, until I figure it out. Because anybody who knows, yourself being a nurse, I'm an engineer, you fail a lot more than you succeed in a lot of these things, right? And we learn from our failures much better than our successes. There's no question. If I'm working on a project and I'm struggling with it, I'm certainly going to know what I don't want to do next time versus if I hit it, first out of the box, I hit it and it's all good. I haven't learned much except what that solution is at that moment for that thing. So, but it is a challenge because food is different than everything else. A lot of these other things, we can eliminate these things easily. Alcohol, drugs, lots of things. But food we can't eliminate. We can't eliminate. We have to eat it, and we have to try to have a different relationship with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You mentioned on your podcast or in Instagram videos that you don't believe food can be an addiction. Tell me more about that. How is that possible? Because I've felt like I'm addicted to sugar.
Sure. I know we're getting into the controversial stuff here.
Oh, I love I love pissing people off. So let's go.
Yeah, this might be controversial. No, it is actually. But yeah, I don't believe that we can be addicted to food. It would be kind of like saying someone's addicted to air or they're addicted to sleep. Like we need food to survive, and we can't be addicted to anything or something that we need physiologically to survive. Now, food can present itself, like our relationship with food can present itself, and it can feel like we are addicted because we feel out of control with it. We feel like we can't stop, but it's not because of addiction. There's other reasons. And this is important to make the distinction because it addresses and it helps us know actually how to address how we are with food. Like you were saying before, with addiction, with true addiction, the solution is sobriety and like eliminating the alcohol, eliminating the drugs, but we can't do that with food. And actually when we do, like say for sugar, if we were to feel like we're addicted to sugar and we try to take it out of our lives because it is a substance that, it's food and our body needs food for survival, we actually have the opposite kind of or reaction to it where we want that food even more. We feel even more drawn to it because we naturally have this primal instinct to want the thing that we don't have. And especially when it comes to food, like this is a primal instinct that our bodies have back when food was, for cases of when food is scarce, when we're in, say, like a famine type situation in our environment, when food is not readily available, it helps us to stay alive. It helps our body stay alive because it prompts us to go find the food, right? So this is like a protective mechanism that our body goes into to keep us alive in a state where food is not readily available. So we can't just approach food feeling like it's an addiction. We can't take the approach of just eliminating it because it will oftentimes make you feel more out of control around that food. And then when you do have the food, you overeat it. I've seen this time and time again with my clients with sugar or chips or like any of those types of foods. Once we work on healing their relationship with that food and taking away the good food, bad food mindset, which is a lot of times what leads us to overeat on those foods because of like what Steve said with that, like what the heck eating? Well, I've already had one and I feel like a failure because I had a couple handfuls of chips or I had the cookie or whatever it is. And I feel like a failure, so I'm just going to overeat it. That's what leads us to feeling out of control. It's that mindset being like this food is good or bad, or the fact that we've restricted it and we've said this is an off limits food. That's what makes us feel addicted to it, not the fact that it's actually addictive. I
have felt like a failure after that bad food, the food that you haven't touched. Say I haven't eaten ice cream in a while and I've seen results. So my addictions now are Coke Zero Sugar, coffee, ice cream. When I say addictions in air quotes, these are my vices now because I don't have any other vices. But if I've had too much ice, I need that ice cream. I need that ice cream. I need that ice cream. Then I eat that ice cream and then I feel guilty afterwards. And I'm at, should I have eaten this? Should I have eaten this? Should I not eaten this? And this is the same talk track I had having a beer. Should I have had that beer? Should I not had that beer? And I just think through, it's sort of the same mechanism. How do you get to that healthier place with those type of foods so it doesn't feel that guilt shame cycle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's working on getting rid of the label of like, this is a good food or a bad food. There's a quote in the intuitive eating book that the author, who's the founder of this whole approach, she says, the only reason you need to feel guilty for eating a food is if you stole the food. And I love that because like, you know, like food is not a moral thing. It is not, quote, good or bad. Yes, there are like different foods that are maybe more nutritious or not. Like, we're not saying that all foods are equally nutritious, but you are not a bad person for having a cookie or having some ice cream, and you don't have to feel guilty for it.
You know, that's really interesting when you said that. And I know this about myself is like, I do still, and I'm not a young guy, right? I mean, I still feel like I'm a bad person when I do bad eating habits. Like, I feel it's a moral attack on my moral character. And I know that's not true, right? I mean, I do. Intellectually, I always say this, you know, when I was struggling with alcohol, intellectually, I knew I couldn't drink long before I was able to stop drinking, right? Like, I knew I had a problem intellectually. We could talk about it. But getting to that step where I was able to admit it and do all the work I needed to do to solve that problem is a whole different thing. And it took me a long time. And it's the same thing. And I've done enough of this. Like I said, I've done diets. I've done, you know, I've spent a lot of money on these things, like a lot of money, thousands of dollars on different things and like I said, and they all work as long as you can follow them. And then as soon as you go off of that path, and you fall back to whatever, they don't work anymore. And that's been my habit. So, I mean, my experience. So, you know, it is one of the things. One of the things you talked about is this whole thing of shortage of foods. And I've done some reading on the human, you know, developmental, and I don't know if you're familiar with the phrase lizard brains, that we all have this brain that goes back to, you know, early manhood, early development of man. When we did, it was a feast or famine, right? It was like you would eat as much as you could, and then you might not eat for days, right? And that is still in part of our DNA. Are you familiar with that? You know, how does that resonate to what you do?
Yeah, a little bit. You know, like our brains are wired for, like I was saying before, are wired for survival. And something
Right.
that might be helpful for people listening is kind of explaining what goes on when we go on a diet and what makes it, like you said, work while we're doing it, but then not work
Sure.
when it doesn't work. The second that we go on a diet, like I was saying before, our brains are kind of primally driven to thinking that we are in a state of like a famine where food is not scarce. And our instinct is always to help us survive this said famine. And so what happens in our body at a like physiological level is all the things that would help us to like go find food in this state of like food being scarce. So your hunger drive actually increases when you go on a diet. So you start to experience more hunger. So that actual hormone ghrelin, which is your hunger hormone, actually increases in your body. Metabolism decreases because if you can think like in a famine where there isn't a lot of food, your body's going to want to hold on to its energy and not spend it quite as quickly, right? It's kind of like if you have a car that's like, you know, you're kind of near the end of like your gas tank and it's like near empty. You're not going to just like rev your engine and like go super fast, right? And just like spend it, right? So your body's going to kind of decrease its metabolism to hold on to that energy and not spend it as quickly. And then you start to actually store more fat when you are dieting because again, fat is protective and, you know, people who have more fat are going to withstand a famine a lot longer than someone who has less. So your body starts to hold on to fat specifically in the abdominal area. And that is all your body's way of protecting you from this quote famine. And then psychologically, we start to think about food more. This is why, you know, specifically the foods that you are restricting on your diet. This is why when you are on a low carb diet, what do you want? Carbs. When you're on a low sugar diet, what do you want? Sugar, right? So this is all how your body responds to this quote famine that it thinks it's in, which is actually you just dieting, right? So all of that, if you can imagine, like that's all working against everything that you're trying to achieve with the diet, right? You're hungrier, your metabolism's slowing down, you start storing more fat, you start thinking about food all the time. Like, this is why something that I say all the time is when you are dieting, you're literally working against your body. So then, people can withstand that kind of like fighting against their body's biological response however long, but then eventually for most people, they're not able to withstand it. And that's what leads to well, I had the one cookie and now I feel like a failure and I overate. Or it's like you just have the cookie and you just are starving and it's like that forbidden food, that off limits food. So you feel like you can't stop eating it. And then that leads to, well, what the heck? Well, I've already failed. And then going back to your old habits until the next time you're like, oh, now I need to make a change. So I'm going to go on another diet. This is the cycle that so many people find themselves on time and time again, year after year after year. So what I propose with the work that I do is let's stop fighting against your body. Let's stop dieting because this doesn't work. And let's find a way to work with your body, which is what we do with intuitive eating. We're going to start to learn to just listen to your body. It's kind of like another analogy that might be helpful is it's like dieting is like trying to swim upstream against a current versus like swimming with the stream. Swimming with the stream is a lot easier. That's how our bodies were made to eat. We were made to eat intuitively. So anyway, does that help kind of explain a little bit what's happening? Yeah.
How do you do this out? So on a side issue, I saw a few Instagram posts that you had that you're out with your husband, which you need to help me understand how to do that. Because I know you have young kids. I have kids. One, how do you get out with your husband by yourself? Which I guess is a separate issue because I've not figured that out. And two, how do you do this intuitively? Because they give you a big old plate of stuff and there's appetizers. And how do you do this without waddling out of the restaurant when you've walked in?
Yeah. So a big part of that is something that we talk about and work on a lot with intuitive eating is satisfaction. And something that a lot of people, specifically people who are chronic dieters or have been on a lot of diets or have this kind of diety thinking, we're so afraid to incorporate satisfaction into our everyday life when it comes to food because of that idea of like, if it tastes good, then I'm going to keep eating and eating. So it's almost like our way of trying to control ourselves from not overeating. So something that I incorporate in every single week is I always try to have foods that I enjoy, that are satisfying, so that when I go out to eat with my husband, it's like no big deal. Like I'm that satisfaction factor has been met throughout the week. So it's not like I've been starving myself or restricting myself all week and not enjoying food and then getting to the weekend and being like, woo, let's just like go crazy because I have been restrictive all week. So I will oftentimes have some chocolate during the day or, some like a juice or I don't know, things like that, like ice cream. I'll have that if I want. I always honor my cravings. And I know that sounds kind of crazy because most people think like if I always honored my cravings, then I would like only want to eat fast food and ice cream. But I have just found that our bodies naturally gravitate towards a really healthy balance when we just listen to our bodies and eat what sounds good. I think that a lot of people, we haven't really, like I said before, given ourselves the chance or given our bodies the chance to even see that that's true. But an example I'll oftentimes use is if you've ever been on a vacation where you have maybe eaten a little bit more overindulgently, right? You've had maybe more desserts or just like more fun foods. And then you come home and what do you crave? Like oftentimes you crave vegetables and you crave some more fresh foods and more homemade foods, right? So this just shows me, and I've seen this with both myself and the clients I've worked with, we naturally gravitate towards a really healthy balance. So I never feel restricted because I always allow myself to have something that I'm enjoying. And then that also helps me to say, have the ice cream or go out and have the appetizer and the entree or whatever, and not feel like I have to eat it all because it's like the only time that I get to enjoy that food or enjoy food as a whole. And I'm able to just eat it a lot more mindfully.
This is funny because I'm an adherent of Paul Gauci, who does Back to Eden gardening. So I have this whole massive perfectionist garden in the back. And what I planted is a whole bunch of asparagus. And he said sort of the same thing. You've been starved from good nutrients all winter. So you crave that stuff like asparagus because it's so loaded with nutrients from the roots into the ground. So you want to go after that in the springtime. And this kind of fits within that model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that you're right, that after you binge on a certain food, what you want is that same food that you've been binging on, right? I have found that to be true. One of the things I struggle with too, and you mentioned it briefly about your own history, is this whole body shaming or this whole body imaging that I think we have. And I know that I've struggled with it too, that I expect my body to look a certain way. And again, when it doesn't look the way I want, what does that do? That causes me to feel bad. And at times it causes me to give up, and it causes me to say, screw it, it's too hard to do it that way. Let me do it. Talk a little bit about that. I know you know your own history or what you found with some of your clients about how, that plays into it.
Yeah. So when I first started doing this work, I didn't really do a whole lot of work with body image, but I started to see such a connection with how we think about our bodies and then how we eat and how we take care of ourselves. And I like to say that, we take care of the things that we care about. And I think a lot of times the message that we get from diet culture is almost like shame yourself enough, shame your body enough to make a change. And that just doesn't work. Shame leads us to want to go, what the heck? Or like stay in a hole and like hide. It doesn't prompt us to go take action. So if we can, instead of shaming our bodies into making a change, if we can come to a place of having a better relationship with our bodies, it doesn't have to look like, oh, I love my body, because maybe that feels really far-fetched for you and that's okay. But rather, maybe we can work towards getting to a place of, I feel neutral towards my body, or I respect my body, even though I don't love how I look all the time. And what this is going to do is it's going to help impact how you show up with food, because you're not going to have that start off on the diet or start off on the program or whatever it is, and then maybe not seeing the results that you're thinking that you should see in the time frame you're wanting to see it, and then throwing it all out the window. It's going to allow you to just be a lot more consistent because you're not working towards changing your body. And this is another reason that I encourage my clients to not weigh themselves when we're working together, because so often the scale is a source of leading to self-sabotage.
Yes.
If it's down, then we're like, oh, yay, now I can have the cookie.
Right.
If it's up, it's like, oop, can't eat today. And it keeps you from actually listening to your body. So we have to go through this period of time of getting rid of the scale, or maybe, a lot of my clients are like, all right, got rid of the scale and I never want to go back. And that's amazing. And so that is, something that I see, as far as if we can work towards having a better relationship with our bodies, that's going to impact how you show up on a day-to-day basis. It's going to impact how you eat, because you're coming at it from this place of, I care about my body, so I'm going to decide to eat this way, or, listen to this about myself, or I'm going to decide to go and move my body today, not from trying to punish myself or trying to change my body, but just from a place of I respect my body and I want to be healthy. It's a far better, more consistent, just a better way to stay motivated for the long haul. And I think most people would agree that they want to be healthy for the long haul and not necessarily just to change their bodies. So,
Victoria, you've been doing a podcast for some time. For you listening to a podcast, you must think this is all fun and games and a lot of joy, which it is. But this is a lot of work. We're in the 120s, you're in the 170s, nearing 180. What made you start a podcast to talk about this, and what's it like to do that?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I learned about intuitive eating from a podcast myself, and I'm a big podcast listener myself. I love just being able to be out on a walk and listening or doing the dishes or whatever. And I just found that I enjoyed it. And I know a lot of my clients really enjoy listening to podcasts, and, a lot of people, I've gotten so much feedback about the podcast really helping people to have a better relationship with food, and even discovering intuitive eating. And like I said before, even for myself, I didn't even know that this was an option, that I didn't have to diet. I didn't have to restrict everything I'm eating and obsess over what I was eating. And so, I just think having a podcast is just such a great way to educate people and just provide free education. And so that's honestly why I do it. And I love doing it. I find so much joy from connecting with people who listen to the podcast. I think that's such a fun thing.
It sounds like an outlet for you.
Of course.
When I'm hearing you talk in such a way that it's a free association. You are talking about this, but I can feel the energy coming out. It doesn't feel like you're reading a script. I'm talking about what I'm passionate about, and I feel at the end you've gotten something out of you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Nope. Most of the time I don't have a script.
Yes. I think that's the best
In the
way.
free flow, me.
For me, that's the best way to go. Tell me about your services. How do we contact you? What do you what do you do? What is the service that you have for coaching?
Yeah. So I work with people one-on-one. We typically work together for 6 months. And I also have a group that I launch every quarter, and it's a 3-month group program. So those are the 2 ways that I work with people. You can learn more about all of that at my website, which is victoria-yates.com. Or like you said, I'm over on Instagram. I'm at nondiet_RN. And you can also listen to the podcast, the Redefining Health podcast.
I think the only thing I look at on your podcast artwork is the pizza that you're pulling out looks like it's from a Sbarro's box, and that's the only thing that I find.
It's actually from Little Caesars,
Oh.
which is not great pizza.
We are from Connecticut, and we have like the greatest pizza in the world.
Yeah.
And I feel bad for people outside of New York, Boston, or Connecticut. I'm like, your pizza's gross.
I actually lived up in New York for a couple of years, and yeah, I agree. That's one thing I miss. That and the bagels.
Yeah.
Oh, the bagels are amazing. Yeah, they're amazing here. Victoria, thank you for coming on our show, sharing a little bit about intuitive eating. I'm trying this now. I'd like to lose some weight, and I don't want to go on a diet again. I want a new lifestyle so I'm not obsessing on this, so I don't feel bad, so I don't feel like I've lost something. And I want to be healthy for my kids and for myself. And so I appreciate the inspiration here.
You're so welcome. I'm so glad I could be here for you.
Thanks, Victoria.
Us.
Yeah.
We'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody.
You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.